present them at the next meeting. Sorry about that.
Next thing on the report. Who's going to do the report?
I don't think we have any
Nothing on the
new
report.
reports now.
No reports? Okay. Next thing, new business. We have a policy presentation today, Officer Law Critical Incident Policy.
So that was one that was posted. Did everybody here get a chance to review the video online? Do we need to pull it up and watch it? It's not super long.
We're basically busy working on the policy.
Take me just a minute to pull it up. If you want to jump ahead. Several of them didn't watch the video that was posted on the web. Yeah, so Karina takes attendance. So total, we have 18 members. So it looks like So we do not have a
While they're setting up for that presentation, Chief, I'm going to be. Oh, sure.
Okay, I apologize for missing the last meeting, perhaps the one before. I don't know. Did everybody get a copy of the letter that I sent last week? So, we are still working through developing our response to all of your recommendations. Because of the volume of them and the kind of the cadence of when we got them, we're working to combine all of the recommendations, which is nearly 400 now, into one response report. I gave you a little bit of an overview of kind of how we categorize them and just some very brief overview of some of what our responses have been so far. But this letter should not be taken or understood or a belief that our response report will be this kind of form. I am still committing to you, and what I said from the very beginning, that each of our responses will be specific, and it will be to that particular recommendation. So there will be a lot that we have to respond to, because like I said, there's probably around 400 recommendations. But each one will have a response from us, an articulation of what we assess the recommendation to be, and what the police department's response to that recommendation and the rationale will be to you. That will be the substance of what our response report will be. So part of the reason is we want to be transparent about that review. We want you to understand the seriousness that we have taken your recommendations and the time that we are spending to understand what you are saying, understand what you're recommending, understand what some of the thoughts are behind that, and then deliver to you an individualized, meaningful response to that recommendation. That is what you can expect from us in the recommendation report that's coming. So I wanted to kind of reaffirm that commitment to you in the use of this letter as well. Some of the reasons we weren't able to deliver it today is a lot of the team was on vacation, as many people are this time of year. And then we received the CAPS recommendations, and then a short time later received an additional document, and we're going to incorporate it all into one. Additionally, I've committed to you to bringing you a very similar, detailed response on the canine policy as well. That will be inclusive of this and delivered with the use of force response report as well. I expect that we will be ready to do that in September. And so once that gets a little bit more clarity, that we'll be coming to you, asking you, do you want to do a special meeting? How do we want to have that meeting where we deliver this response report? I intend to deliver the response report to you prior to this special meeting, so you will have had time to review it. And so when we have that report or that meeting on the report, you will have had time to review the report, form questions so that there can be some discussion about our responses as well. I don't know, I expect that that will happen in September, and we'll be coming back to you whether you want to have a special meeting or how that works. Part of that will be informed by how long the report is and how much time we anticipate it will take to go through it all as well. But again, in lead up to that meeting, you'll have the response report in advance of that meeting, so it can be a meaningful one where you're not in real time trying to review this and trying to form questions. You'll be able to have had some time to review that. Yes?
Is there, I understand that possibly scheduling a special meeting to, because I think on our last meeting, last month, some of us raised some suggestion of can we bring it back as a kind of a closing conversation, highlighting some of the common themes that came out from all of this, discussion and recommendations. And I understand people's times is limited, and I don't know that we're going to get majority or a big engagement in a special meeting. Is there a reason we wouldn't kind of add it to one of our existing meetings?
No, other than, no. No, the short answer is no. Other than it was going to take, I anticipate it probably takes the whole meeting at least. And so we were going to try to continue to make sure that we're making progress. So that was the only thing. But again, it may be unrealistic. Like I said, once the report is formulated, it may be so lengthy that that's unrealistic. And we have to do exactly what you're suggesting. I guess what I'm holding back is let's see how long it is, and then we can come back to you for your feedback and your ideas on what kind of meeting and when. Is it a regular meeting that we would deliver all this in? I guess that's what I'm asking is let us get it done so we can see the length of it and then have some conversations about how we should deliver it.
Yeah.
But you might be right that we already have that time set aside. Everybody else has that time set aside, and that may be the most appropriate way to do it.
Yeah, again, just kind of, I'm just thinking out loud here, but I think a missing component is like that conversation with the larger community. I know some of us are based, we are engaging, but I think it's on a smaller scale than what's intended. And so I'm wondering too, if like maybe this report back to a kind of a closing conversation, can we take it to the community?
Well, here's what we've envisioned for that is get the policy through the CAP, receive your recommendations, respond to your recommendations, make the drafts, get a draft of a final product, and then the police department is going to be holding community meetings, inviting the community for input, posting it available where the public can have access to it, where they can weigh in, and then also have a meeting for the public to ask questions, to have that kind of dialogue and discussion as well.
I'm scared of other thoughts. But yeah, I mean, I guess, I think we can make it work. It's just asking additional meetings or special meeting. I'm just worried that we're not going to have that conversation, that a few of us have expressed interest in, like, can we actually talk about it instead of like, individually. A few of us submitted specific recommendations, but can we overall just feel like we are engaging?
And I think we're working to have the content of the report be such that a specific recommendation has a specific response to it. You get the report in advance of any meeting so that you will have had time to formulate whatever questions you have regarding that. But we're trying to make it a meaningful document. I expect it to be quite lengthy because it isn't just going to be, you should not expect and you will not get from us that A, this is the recommendation, B, not accepted. That's not going to happen. It will have a detailed rationale about why we've arrived at the decision that we have. And then there will be opportunities, because we're going to give you the report in advance of the meeting, I believe that there will be time to have meaningful discussion about why we arrived at it. Did we miss something? Did you just not, or do we just completely disagree? That's a reality in some of it as well. But what no one will be able to walk away from is that we didn't have the opportunity to have dialogue and discussion. That I'm committed to. Yes, sir.
Chief, I appreciate the letter that you sent out that gives kind of an overall sense of your initial impression of the different categories and stuff. Maybe when we get just before, as we get the full report, there can be something coming in that's kind of a
Like an
Similar
executive
to the-
summary or something?
Yeah, similar to
Abstract
the-
or something like that?
Right, similar to the letter that you just sent, so that when we do take the time to look at the individual and the specific detailed explanation, we're going to be able to latch that onto a larger framework of what overall ideas were incorporated.
And I think I put in the letter the kind of the categories: accepted, not accepted, accepted with modification, further. And we're working through the format of that, but one of the things we're discussing is the response report being categorized that way, so that it's very clear. You're not jumping around. Okay, this one's accepted, this one's not. You're going to know this whole category or this whole section is the accepted ones. This section is the not. This is the one where accepted with modifications, because I think that would help you navigate that as well. But we're talking about that. So I would ask you, if you have suggestions on some of that kind of stuff, then let Josh know. If you're thinking about how you would read it, then your input would be helpful in that. But we're trying to make it digestible, but also meaningful, and not just an act that we responded. We said we would respond, we did, and now we're moving on. It's not the intent at all. I was trying to make sure that our intent is communicated in the form of that letter, and I hope and I believe that you'll find that our response report is further evidence of our intent to meaningfully discuss and respond to your recommendations. Yes. I hope to fulfill that.
So will you give us a few weeks to review your report before?
Yeah, I think, again, I'm kind of talking in somewhat of an unknown because I don't know the length of it. Somebody told me today it probably will be in excess of 120, 150 pages, potentially. So it's quite lengthy. But again, we're working on the format and trying to organize it where it can be digestible, where it can be, where you'll be able to navigate it, and there's some clarity around that. But yeah, I think if it's that long, then you're going to need some lead time to be able to, in order for us to have a meaningful conversation on that meeting date, whenever that is, yeah, you're going to have some lead time to get it. I recognize that. Yeah, we're not going to deliver it on Friday and see you on Tuesday. It's just not possible.
Anything else? Any more questions on the use of force policy, recommendations, response?
Because I think, Brian, wherever you are, I know we have some members of the use of force team are there. Is there some discussion or things of clarity that the team wanted to engage the captain on?
Yeah, if you want to address that now, we will do the second part of the agenda.
Well, since we're already here, let's do it.
Where's John? Oh, no, you're right. Are you prepared for the clarity?
So for everybody else, I was told earlier today that members of the use of force team who are working through some of this may have some questions for you to seek some clarity on some of the recommendations and what you meant or intended, or so that we can have a better understanding. And so I wanted to give them an opportunity to do that while you're all here as well.
All right, so as we went through the first batch of questions, which was 214 recommendations that you guys submitted, we got through that first batch of 214, and like Chief said, the response to them was either going to be an accepted to your recommendation, not accepted, further clarification needed, or accepted with modifications. So what we've done is we went through those the initial batch that was responded to, and there was 5 of them that stood out that needed further clarification. So what we'll do right now is I'll go through those 5, and I don't know who the author is of them, but as a collective, you guys can let me know where you're going with it, or help us to clarify it so that we can provide a response of accepted, not accepted, or whatever the case may be. So as we go through them, the first one was recommendation 13. The recommendation detail was the working group requests more explanation about how this is being enforced, tracked, remediated, when found. Not sure that this is a place to explicitly state or explain, but it's nevertheless important. And what that's referring to is the policy section on the department values on bias-free policing. So the part of the policy that was highlighted was BPD will not tolerate bias in use of force. That was the section that was highlighted in the recommendation. So the further clarification that we needed was Well, this didn't come through as a recommendation into the change of the policy, but it just seemed like more of a discussion point of how it's tracked. This is something that we felt would probably be better addressed with the reporting and accountability policy, because that covers a lot more in-depth reporting and accountability and the tracking of these types of things and how they will be caught. So I'm not sure who wrote that question or if there's any further clarification you guys can provide to that one.
Sorry, we didn't come prepared. I don't have my document. I would imagine our working document will help us because a few of us engaged in the working group. We're like, wait, where's more notes on the side? I don't know. It's hard to-
So is the question, do you think, is the question, how would in policy we reflect the tracking of
My understanding
prohibiting bias-free policing?
Yeah, it's how we would track or remediate or enforce not using bias in policing or use of force. That's what it seemed like the question or the recommendation was. It didn't come through as a clear recommendation, so that's why we wanted to get clarification.
You said that was in relation to the bias-free.
Yeah.
It may not be captured in our Google Docs.
It is. I mean, it rings a bell, but I don't recall what was our conversation as a group. I think a few of us.
Yeah, that question was by a person who is not.
I do think that what Chief said is accurate. It's looking for clarification or it's stating how is this tracked as regards to enforcing bias-free policing as far as it goes to force. So I'm not sure if there's a question or if there's a way we can clarify that. I'm not sure exactly how it will be stated in the policy. If you'd like, I can read this whole section of the policy and you guys can let me know.
Well, I think what might be better is, let's go through the 5, like that one, let's mark it aside and email it to me, and then I can work with the people who receive it to get a response back. So if it's the working group, I know in general who we're working with, and I can send that out and have you guys come back with a response, and we'll get a written response to clarify that. But let's go through them all, because there might be some that you guys are able to give them clarification now so they can keep working, but whatever we can't answer here, I'll shoot an email out to you guys ASAP so we can get them clarified so they can respond to us. Is that fair? Good?
Yeah.
The next one was reference number 54. So in this one, the recommendation detail was CAP would be interested to learn more about EPD's current practices and point of view related to de-escalation tactics and techniques. Again, this didn't really come through as a recommendation, but rather more of a discussion point that we can talk about here during the community panel. So just to provide some clarity, and the part that was referenced in the policy, if you guys are interested, it was the de-escalation and tactics, de-escalation tactics and techniques portion of the policy, just in general. No specific reference, but just in general to that portion of the policy. So just in response to that, to know a little bit more about how we're training in de-escalation. So it begins in the academy with Learning Domain 20, which covers all use of force. There's an entire chapter dedicated in that 2 days of training in the academy to de-escalation, what it means, how officers can use these tactics and techniques. So that's the initial foundation, is what's set in the academy for de-escalation. After that, in the mini academy, which if you guys, just to refresh your memory on it, the academy takes place about 28 weeks, and that's the officer's initial introduction into law enforcement. That's where we give them their foundation from the ground up. Following their graduation from the academy, there's a mini academy that takes place. That's usually anywhere between 2 and 4 weeks, depending on the size of the academy. During that mini academy, we also put them through an additional class on the force science realistic de-escalation course. During that, we go through a lot of examples of scenario-based de-escalation situations, go through all the different tactics and techniques that we cover in the policy, and explain that portion of the de-escalation course in the mini academy. On top of that, there is the cycle that we go through with our advanced officer training or the post-perishable skills. So every other year, we cover a use of force legal update. Part of that legal update includes a section on de-escalation. In addition to those, the ongoing training that officers receive, whether it's through early intervention training or shift briefing training, there's always an emphasis on de-escalation. No matter what the topic is, if it concerns force, even if it doesn't concern force, there's always a reiteration on de-escalation and how we can better de-escalate things so the officers can reduce the need to use force. Any questions on that? I'm not sure who wrote that question or if there's anything we can clarify on it.
Well, I have a question from the CAPS perspective. Take that as an example of a kind of a, it was written at a recommendation, even though it's, what would you expect to see? What would be responsive to that? From, the CAP is interested in more training and more information about how we do our de-escalation training. What would a response to that look like for you in the response report? Like a abbreviated, what he just articulated, kind of bullet pointed is in phases, or the different, I mean, what would you consider responsive to that kind of a question statement about CAP is interested in more information about de-escalation training? How would we respond to that in the response report? Yeah,
One
Kathleen?
thing I would like is maybe to actually have you do some role plays and show us a little bit of what.
So like a demonstration.
Yeah, give a girl, we did a few of those years ago. Because then we could see it.
Okay.
But what about in the actual report, like
How-
as in documentation?
Yeah, to be responsive to that specific question slash statement slash recommendation, what would you consider a response from us?
Do you
Being
have
res-
a written, like what's in the training or something you could summarize?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. We could compile exactly in a narrative form what he just described in terms of phases, the content, but that can spin off into get really lengthy as well. So that's why I'm asking, is because we want to be responsive, but in that kind of a scenario, what would you consider a response? It could be a demo, and we could certainly do that, but we could also give an overview of what he just said and limit, and that would be a response.
Not 100% sure, because I don't think I made that, but I think participating in the discussion process, sometimes I believe we documented, we couldn't understand where we were going because we didn't fully understand where you had been previously. So again, I think that kind of provides some context. We were trying to just develop a better understanding of how your processes in de-escalation have evolved. And so,
Okay.
I mean, and so we
Which
might-
is separate from actually trying to work to formulate a policy,
right.
even though it's related. I understand your point, but
That's all I.
because we're trying to give direction to build a policy and be responsive to that. So
Right.
we're going to continue working. I was just curious as to what you would consider responsive to a statement slash question like that.
Sorry, can I ask you to read the statement again? Because I think more of like just seeing your training manual, it was just kind of like, what is the ongoing engagement whenever incidents occur? I mean, this is weeks ago, and we've done like 4 policies now, so I don't know, they're all blurred to me now. But
I can relate.
But I just remember having conversations as a work group of like, we really are interested in like, how are we emphasizing or prioritizing, and how is it ongoing, like, again, just ongoing emphasis.
No, that's fair, and he'll reread the question, but I also wanted to use it so that our team can go back, and as they go through and see more of this, that we kind of have an idea of what you would expect to see from something like that in the report.
I think something that would be interesting to see is, and I know I haven't been super privy to a lot of the conversations that have happened, it's been a busy summer, but what would be interesting to see would be like a sort of we're excited type page, right? Like usually when there's trainings that are coming out, there's usually those trainings. I think I heard you say something about force science, like reasonable de-escalation. So that's like a very specific name. We're familiar now with force science and like what that means. That definitely put my ear up because of the sort of contention or the drama that happened here around that. But something along those lines, right, where it's like, this is the title of the training, this might be some stuff that, and this is like a work cited, right? So it's like, this is where you're getting your trainings, these are the trainings that are done on this sort of stuff. That way, in like, it would be easier to compare like other departments, like training, that kind of stuff. And I don't know if there are any sort of risks with providing that kind of stuff, but I can see something like that being a helpful
Reread
answer
the, okay, I can visualize that. Reread the statement or whatever.
The recommendation detail again was CAP would be interested to learn more about BPD's current practices and point of view related to de-escalation tactics and techniques.
that was referenced on the important section. I'm assuming.
Okay.
That we talked about.
Well, we'll work on it, and obviously we'll have a conversation at some point, but I don't know, I know you don't have much clarity from that, but,
I think, I mean, and Kathleen, to specifically respond to you, like the role play examples, the invitation for you guys to come participate in the Force Officer Simulator were probably one of the best examples where you could see the practical application of de-escalation techniques. Where you could see, and not necessarily that you would have to perform, or I mean, this is open for you guys to come observe officers. If you didn't feel comfortable performing in it yourself, like we would be willing to have each one of you there, even to watch us officers perform through. So you could see an example of how we employ de-escalation techniques, intervention, all these things that are covered through the stipulated judgment and in the policy, how we can apply those through the use of the simulator. Now, I think that you get much more value out of it by participating in it yourself to understand the stress that goes into it, even just being in front of a computer screen. But these are one of the real world examples that we give officers, and it would be extremely beneficial for you guys to at least come and observe. And so I know that's something that's been open in the past, and we still have that open invitation if it's something that we wanted to schedule for the CAP.
How frequently is it done?
So it depends whenever it comes to officers. Right now, we're trying to schedule all the shifts in the next coming months, so it's getting much busier where we're going to try and schedule them over the next month of like September or October. But as far as frequency for all the officers to go through it, right now the only requirements that we're looking at is like an annual basis, but we're trying to do it more frequently than that. But just recently, the new simulator that has it's like a full immersive. There's 5 screens. You basically walk into a room and there's screens all around you, so you have to be aware of your all your surroundings, things that are going on over here behind you and whatnot. It's really beneficial. It's
Are you gonna bring that one out to the fair?
It doesn't move, but we will be at the fair with the single screen. We will still be there. But we would make our schedule available for you guys. Whenever
Again, your retraining is annual for all officers?
we're trying to incorporate that into an annual training, but more than likely it's going to be more frequently than annual once we get the ball rolling. But again, this is a newer simulator that's only been up and running for the past couple months. So prior to that, the ongoing training that officers were mandated to receive was the advanced officer schools and the post-perishable skills that goes on a 2-year cycle. So every other year in year 1 they receive arrested control training for our block, and then every other year after that they receive a use of force legal update, and that's where we incorporate the de-escalation tactics.
How can Captain Reeves go about actually scheduling that? Would you like them to email me, and I can push them through, but let's give them a path to actually be able to get that set up.
I think that'd be best coordinated through you.
If anybody from the CAP is interested, we can accommodate that just about any time. John can make somebody from his staff available, whether you want to come do it yourself or just observe them running through it. The simulator brand is Virtra, VIRTA. If you go on their website, they've got a lot of information. There's training courses built into it where John's team can do a short class, and then they go in and they experience a scenario based off of the class that was just taught. But their website's got a ton of information. But we could accommodate that just about any time that you want.
So if you guys are interested, go ahead and email me and I'll facilitate that process with you. So just let me know and I'll make sure that.
I think that the suggestion for the simulator is great, and for some people that might be really useful. But I know that if I go into a flight simulator, I'm going to crash the pretend airplane because I'm not a real pilot, and there's a good reason for that. For my own part, I think that a simulator like that is just going to teach me that your job is really hard, which I already know. So I wasn't the one that left that comment, but I was certainly involved in that discussion about what de-escalation tactics or techniques do exist. What I think would be helpful, at least for me, is maybe a miniature version of at least spots the issues and helps me to see what is available and why it may or may not be appropriate for individual circumstances.
And I,
Go ahead.
and just to follow up with that, I think that's the context of what that statement was, is because I had brought some research on some de-escalation practices, but we didn't have a reference point for what your de-escalation practices and training involved. And now that this was months and months of discussions, so I'm thinking that it could have been coming out of the fact that we know what some of the research tells us. How does that translate to what your lesson plans look like? So if you could just, I'm sure Post has a bullet point lesson plan and exactly what de-escalation training outline is. If you provided it, then it could give us some context to how that aligns with what other research tells us. And I think that's could be where it came from. Am I correct?
But I also,
That was what started the conversation.
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I cut you off.
No, but I also, because I feel like the simulators is just extreme situations. And I think you guys have said that these are
I
very
think,
minimal.
sorry, pardon my interruption as well. I think what you'd find is that it's not used for that. It's not used in unrealistic, they only end one way. It's to challenge the officer and that's part of what we would ask you to have some curiosity about, to show that it's used to teach people skills and have them work through and problem solve. It isn't just a video game that ends one way, you either crash or you don't. It's not. It's intended, so it could be an element that we talk about, whether we have a brief demonstration, like here, a brief demonstration of an actual class being taught, but you would see all the different elements because it's used not in that sort of extreme video game setting. It's what it appears to be, but it's used to teach people how to think and give them opportunities to make mistakes when they can make mistakes, and to teach and correct that, whether it's patience, whether it's language, whether it's forced judgment, whether it's all these other kinds of things. So it's used very broadly, and I think that's what's missing. When you think about a simulator, it's very easy to fall into a silo, and it's not that at all.
The ones that I've seen, it's always end up dead.
Of course.
But, yeah, most people, when you think simulator, it's like shoot, don't shoot.
Yeah.
But this one is not that. There's courses on there where it's just a person standing there, maybe like they encounter some sort of crisis. And based on the officer's communication style, the instructor can branch off, make them, not cooperate longer, or if the officer's doing really well, like, okay, now they're going to cooperate. And there's all these different routes that the scenario can go, but that's the beauty of this Virtua program, is that it's not all about shooting or use of force. It's these courses of how to interact with people.
So are the officers, are they scored on their, participation in these scenarios and then coached afterwards? Is it a pass fail or?
There is a debrief that takes place after each of the scenarios that an officer or a community member, whoever goes through. We debrief and talk about the things that they did well, the things that they could have done better. And there is a threshold. Now, that's not a clear black and white because all the scenarios are different, but there is a threshold. If there's such a poor performance, there's going to be remedial training that gets provided. Whether it's continued through the simulator or it's something else that we have to have another side scheduled training where we put them through more hands-on training to make sure that they're proficient in their skills. And then it continues until we can show that they're proficient enough to be, cleared to work in the field.
I guess an example, sorry, just because I want to, I think this is a chance to bring up an example that we received in the last 2 weeks, where a community partner was recording an incident with somebody who I think was speeding and they crashed into a roundabout. They weren't drunk, but they only spoke Spanish. And so this person who was recording, they said that there was about 6 BPD cars engaging in this. And it was very intimidating, but the person involved in this didn't speak English, and so I think they agitated the situation. And I wasn't present; I just saw very, very limited videos. But I guess the request or the ask was that these are the situations that, this didn't need to escalate to 7 police cars responding to, a situation where it seemed like a traffic incident. Yes, he was speeding, he hit something, I don't know exactly what happened. It ended up being that this individual was arrested and taken. I don't know what happened, why was he arrested? But from the person who reported this is that it didn't seem that he was, under the influence. And so, but they weren't close enough to engage or participate as to like an interpreter or something. But that was the request, like, these are the situations that, I don't know that they happen very often, but it was referred, I want to say last week, with those small video clips, and just was curious to like what type of conversations happening in the CAP where is this a situation where it could have been handled differently? If it was an incident, like why do we need 7 police cars responding to this traffic incident? So-
And we don't know the exact details or circumstances of the case you're referring to either, so it's hard to give a response because there are absolutely situations where 7 officers or 7 cars might be necessary given the circumstances. But again, given the limited context without knowing which call or which incident you're referring to, it's hard to give a response to that without knowing.
Yeah, and I mean, they weren't close enough to collect information that could be helpful as a follow-up, other than it was a traffic incident, this person was arrested, but, after one officer reported, like, all these other cars showed up, and it just escalated the situation where the person was arrested.
Well, so just to steer things back towards the de-escalation conversation we're having, whenever it comes to the simulator and the de-escalation types of scenarios that we can put through, just to give you some examples, even if you're dead set you don't want to participate in the simulator, that's fine. If you don't want to observe officers participating in the simulator, because like Jacob, like you say, like I'm not expecting you to perform at the same level that Officer Williams, who's been trained and is an officer, would perform. But if you do want to come observe and see what types of scenarios, so like Rosie, you can see what types of de-escalation scenarios we're using, and it's not just all shooting and this and that. There's some scenarios that are, an officer responds to a runaway juvenile, and they come into contact with a vulnerable population, a juvenile who's suicidal and armed with a knife, and they have to work their way through this. Now, there's definitely a way that it could go south if the officer performs poorly, and then we would be talking about remedial training. But the way that we would want them to perform is to resolve the situation peacefully by using the communication skills and engaging with the screen, engaging with the individual on the screen, because there are different outcomes based off the officer's performance.
Is it possible for us to see one of those?
Yeah, and that's exactly what I'm offering.
I think what we're saying is, we like a little, what Jacob said, a summary, like a little syllabus 101 that we cover.
Yeah, that
But
makes
also to see how you, I guess for me, a big part of it is, what's the attitude? Are you really telling him de-escalation is critical? It's so important. It's just as important as arresting somebody. And that's kind of what, part of, I think, when we had our discussion too, is like, and what happens if it, like what Rose's story, and I heard another story where there were 7 or 8 police officers at some minor event recently too. So it's kind of like, how does that fit in? How does the fact, does having too many officers there, is that going to help escalate or de-escalate? To me, that's a big question.
And again, it really just, it depends on the circumstance. I can tell you as a supervisor that's worked in the field, whenever a situation initially starts kicking off and things are unknown and there's a lot of chaos going on, there might be a bigger response from officers. But as soon as things calm down, one of the first things I do, and every supervisor should be doing, is, hey, who all needs to be here? Okay, you, and you. Okay, the rest of you guys go clear stuff.
Yeah, that's a good question, because I asked somebody who tells them, and they go, well, we don't know, we can go wherever we want.
That's what the job of the supervisor is. A sergeant, a senior police officer, that's the roles that they take. It's
I would tell you, we are very sensitive to, the resources are so limited, the needs of our community are so great, that we want to be where we're needed and not where we're not. And so that is a thing for us. And the command staff is sensitive to that. And we want to know when it's not performing that way. And there's daily evaluation of a variety of things that take place to make that resource determination. But to get back to that other question, the initial question I started this, the scenario that Jacob described, that kind of makes sense to me, that I think that we can, so I'm thinking responsive to the response report, that there may be something there, perhaps not in the report, but a reference of what we're going to do to be responsive to it. So,
Real quick, you mentioned this tool a lot, but it's not mentioned anywhere. I don't see it in the policy. So maybe
as one of the resources.
Well, yeah, and again, I think one of the things that we want to do is, we know that you're doing all of these things, but it's not being documented as well as it could be to demonstrate measures that you're taking to make these changes in the department. So, for example, if this is a tool, and then maybe some description in the policy as to its intent and purpose to continue de-escalation practices, not just at the onset at training, but throughout officers' career, an officer's career. So that, again, it's not just one and done, you continue it throughout.
Yeah, okay.
I have a question, probably for you. If a person, an individual, were to come and use the simulator, how much time should they set aside for that? And related, if a group were to come, is that something that can be accommodated in one big shot? And how much time, big shot, how much time should be allocated for a group to come and see that?
It's really on the, it really, we can make so many adjustments. It really depends on the group. If an individual wanted to come in and they have 15 minutes, we could get them through 4 or 5 scenarios in 15 minutes and do a quick debrief in that short amount of time. When we schedule it for officers, it's typically 20-minute blocks that we use to have 1 or 2 officers go through, and that's kind of how we're engaging it at this point. And then a debrief is separate from that. So, I mean, really, it's probably about 30 to 45 minutes that an officer will have to go through a handful of scenarios, and then they're back on the field. It's more like micro trainings that we're trying to provide just through the use of the simulator. More frequent micro trainings. A large group, like if everyone here at the CAP showed up, I mean, I would set aside 2-3 hours, and whoever wanted to go through, just depending on how many people showed up, we would pick and choose, and the ones that wanted to participate could participate. And the way that the room is set up, there's almost like a viewing section. You know, there's a little room that has a window, and you can look into the simulator, and you can see what they're seeing. You can hear some of the things that they're saying and see how they perform. The cool thing on the simulator is there's actually a camera that is viewing you, and you can kind of go back and look at it and see how you did, how you moved, how you performed, and whatnot. So that's another tool that we have on the simulator that we use for the officers. We go back and we replay for them, like, hey, this is where you stood. You know, you didn't see this person behind you or whatever because you weren't, you know, checking your surroundings. You know, just to give you an example. But we can see recorded. It doesn't save the recording anywhere, but you can play it back and let them see how they move, perform, how they did.
You need to even simulator, didn't you, when we invited everybody?
Yes, two of us showed up, and actually it was very interesting. You know, even things I didn't think I'd do in a shooting situation, I did. So they kind of critiqued me on what I could have did better, because like they said that with the simulator, it kind of changes based on what we were saying. So even when I got to the scenario, if I responded one way, the simulator might give me a different concept of how to go. So you didn't know what was going to happen because you're speaking and it's going based on what you're saying to the individual.
I've done the simulator probably 5 times, and it's been very helpful for me understanding why decisions are made. So I would encourage a mix, like Gina was saying, and Kathleen was saying, having kind of like broken down synopsis of things, but also encourage those who have not participated in the simulation to at least participate or watch the participation, because your outlook may be a little bit different when you're in that moment. And so it helps every time it's answering new questions and bringing a new perspective to why things are done the way that they are. So,
Yeah, now you mentioned the fair. For anybody that doesn't know, we have 2 simulators. The one that Sergeant Bishop described that's permanent, 5 screens. We also have one that's just 1 screen that's portable, and it's out at the fair every year. We've got like a big tough shed that we put it in. It's air conditioned, so you can let it cool off and experience the simulator.
I didn't want to plug that again.
Where's the 5 screens? Headquarters.
So for the sake of time management, I would say I think we have enough clarification moving forward that will document some of the training as a response, but it's open to the simulator. Reach out to me and I'll help coordinate if you do that schedule. But I just want to make sure we're managing time and we have time to go over the presentation as well. So.
And there's only 5 comments, and that's already 2 of them, so there's 3 more.
Yeah, go ahead.
So the next one is comment 60. The recommendation details, again, covering de-escalation tactics and techniques, covering the De-escalation tactics and techniques include but are not limited to, and the specific section was communicating with the subject. The recommendation is to add communicating with the subject and add including but not limited to, explaining the officer's immediate concerns and objectives to the subject, and by providing the subject with acceptable options to satisfy the subject's own immediate concerns and objectives. So I think the question was a little bit confusing for us, so we were unsure what the author's intent was behind adding the phrases acceptable options to satisfy the subject's own immediate concerns and objectives.
What section was that? Sorry.
That was for the de-escalation section. It was section 323.1. It's one of the listed de-escalation tactics and techniques. It's section, subsection D.
I have those as one that figure out.
And again, I'll just reread the part that the author wanted added was including but not limited to explaining the officer's immediate concerns and objectives to the subject, and by providing the subject with acceptable options to satisfy the subject's own immediate concerns and objectives. And I think the confusing part was that last part of the statement.
Acceptable.
I know who wrote that.
Any clarification?
Did it sound like the lawyer wrote that? Yeah, so if the subject's own immediate concerns are to get their necks fixed, that's not what you're concerned with. But if, say, their concerns are to come out from this dark closet without getting shot, to be able to communicate to them, like specifically what to do. You guys are no stranger to this. Like you can say a traffic stop, put your hands out of the window, right? Hold them there. But like specific steps for the person to be able to take that gives them assurances that it's not going to escalate and also accomplishes the officer's immediate concerns as well.
Okay. So could we amend the addition to, because I mean, we're open to adding additional language there. Communicating with the subject, including providing the subject with options to further the goal of de-escalation or reducing the need to use force. Something like that. Because now that we understand what the intent of that addition is, we can draft up some response to it in our response paperwork or in our response page and see if that's acceptable to you guys.
Yeah, I can imagine any number of scenarios. Let's say somebody's really frantic, but the thing that they're trying to accomplish is that Fifi just ran away and they need to grab Fifi before she runs into the street or something. The officer isn't going to necessarily just let that person accomplish that goal, but there could be any number of ways of addressing that and saying, well, we've got animal control or whatever.
Yeah, so kind of just like, meeting the best interest of the person and the officers in the communication. Okay. So we'll address that and see if we can come up with some language that's agreeable to all of us. Any other questions or concerns on that one?
Jacob, do you have specific thing you're recommending that say? Instead of communicating with the subject, do you want to say something else? Is that so we can work with that?
So I think the stuff that Detective Bishop, that Sergeant Bishop just read was the specific recommendation. I'm not married to it. If there's some other way of phrasing it that seems to make more sense or accomplishes your goals as well, that was fine.
The next one is cap reference number 158. This is a little bit longer, detailed recommendation. It's important for the officer to continually assess during these incidents, but it is also important for the officer to continually assess whether they are in such an encounter. So an officer should also continually assess whether there are limitations which the officer is not aware, which might inform or explain the conduct of the individual and the potential noncompliance. For example, if an individual is simply not responding to officers, it does not immediately mean force should or can be applied. There are many individuals who lack the ability to hear or have an injury that contributes to their inability to respond to officers. Additionally, individuals going through mental health crisis may have lost the ability to communicate. Peace officers must also be aware that physical noncompliance does not automatically mean resistance. While taking in the totality of the circumstances, officers should attempt to determine if an individual has physical limitations that may be affecting their ability to comply. Physical limitations could be an inability to speak, hear, walk, or even move limbs. Awareness on scene may help eliminate confusion that can lead to unnecessary force being applied. And then referencing back, that's in reference to the encounters with vulnerable populations, section 300.14. A lot of the things that were covered in this are already in this section. I'm not sure who the author is of this one, but in this section, and I'll just read it off to you guys, the vulnerable populations include children under the age, or under 18 years of age, elderly persons, pregnant women, people with physical, mental, or developmental disabilities, and people who have difficulty communicating, including because of limited English proficiency, or hearing and communication impairment. Challenges faced by members of vulnerable populations may impact communication, their ability to comply, and their understanding of the situation, and may cause a person to experience additional harm. Officers must continually assess the situation, employ de-escalation techniques, and seek peaceful resolutions during incidents involving vulnerable populations. So I'm not sure if there was something more specific in this one that needs to be added, or that the recommendation wants to add to that section that's not already covered.
I think maybe the comment wasn't expressed as clearly as it could have been. Because this, looking back at our notes and stuff, this was kind of a combination of a larger discussion. In 300.14, that's the section that this is in, the policy lists a bunch of things that officers should do if they are in an encounter with a vulnerable population. The emphasis that we're trying to make is the officer might not know that they are in an encounter with a member of a vulnerable population. And so not just to control or to guide the behavior when they're in those conditions, but also to encourage constant assessment even when they think they're not in one of those circumstances, because they might be and just not know about it.
So almost just like explaining that these should be a constant assessment of whether a person may be in a vulnerable population or not.
Right, and so if you, in that section, if you're looking at the second paragraph, officers must continually assess the situation. It's written in this section, sort of presupposing that they're in such a situation. And the emphasis I think we were trying to make was also that they should assess every situation in order to evaluate whether they're in one of these such situations. And if so, react accordingly.
So maybe if we just add a statement in there, officers must continually assess every situation for times that they may be in contact with persons in vulnerable populations and employ de-escalation techniques, seek peaceful resolutions and whatnot. So almost adding like that little caveat on there, like every situation should be consistently assessed to see if they're in contact with the vulnerable population and employ de-escalation techniques and whatnot.
Yeah, I think that would address what we were recommending.
Any other comments on that one?
Yeah, can I add that the vulnerable population definition changes from policy to policy? There's nothing consistent with it, so maybe define that definition and throw it in all your other policies.
Yeah, in that CBW one, it was different than it was in other ones.
Yeah, and again, there was a lot of recommendations that you guys made that were extremely helpful. I want to lay that out there because there were so many that we saw that were clarifying some language for us, finding grammatical errors, finding things that were inconsistent in one part of the policy versus the other. And we accepted already a great majority of them to find that consistency. So there is a lot that we've already identified that you guys have helped us to find where we could have made improvements, and we've accepted those. So there is a lot that we've already seen there. And these are just the few 5 that we had further clarification on. So, but thank you for the reminder. I'll make sure that we look into it.
And I think some of the things is not just under the umbrella of vulnerable populations. Those things can transpire that changes the dynamics of an encounter. And so I think that's also what we were just trying to say is even though we might have engaged somebody who didn't fit the vulnerable population initially, their mental health could change or situations could change throughout the encounter depending on how the situation plays out. And so always using de-escalation, even though it may not fit under the, initially started under the official vulnerable population. Does that make?
It makes sense here, I'm just trying to think of how to make it
How to
sense
make
here.
it, I know, and as you can see from our responses, we can still do that. And I know, we don't want a 12,000 page policy, but at the same
I'd love to
time.
hear or find a way to incorporate that officers might encounter someone that, their behavior changes. And I will say that through some of our de-escalation training, there is a matrix that we use that goes off the, and now you might have to correct on it, but the behavior of a person, the compliance, and the, what's the third one?
You got behavior.
Behavior, either they're compliant or not compliant.
Their mind is there, they're contaminated with clear thinking, so it's like, people might be contaminated, they might not be.
Yeah, because we look at the behavior, whether they're compliant or not compliant, they're either contaminated or not contaminated, and that could be contaminated emotionally, that could be contaminated through substances. There's a whole different bunch of things that could contaminate someone's mindset. And this is one of the things that we could bring up to you guys in our de-escalation training. If we, bring it down. There's a couple forms that we could just, give you guys that would explain what we're talking about over there, the matrix that we use, because it breaks down how to assess someone, and you're consistently assessing them through your contact with them. So, it's addressing our training for that, but it's like, how do we put that
How do
in
you
the
put it
policy?
in here without making it so large? But like I said, since it is so important, de-escalation is so important, we'd like to have more content in what you're doing, like I said, in the department. And I don't know if it's all in this, like all the efforts that you are making towards improving your de-escalation tactics. I don't think it's all.
I don't think it is. I think there's so much more context to our training, and as we get into the training plan and whatnot, like you guys will see so much more that we're doing with boots on the ground, actually having these conversations about this. There's so much more that goes into training, but it's a fine line of like how much do we put into the policy that needs to be there. But again, it's something that, and I'll work with Lieutenant Finney and India to go through some of those documents and see what we can provide you guys as far as an example of what we're talking about with the de-escalation and how to assess someone consistently or constantly through a contact. But just for time's sake, let's move on to the last one. This is section, or recommendation 175, and it's in regarding policy section 300.21, shooting at or from moving vehicles. So what the policy says is shooting at or moving vehicles is deadly force. An officer shall not discharge a firearm at the operator or occupant of a moving vehicle unless, 1, the operator or occupant poses an imminent threat of death or serious bodily injury to the public or an officer by means other than the vehicle, and the officer is unable to get out of the way in reference to Government Code 7286, subsection B. And then officers shall not shoot at any part of the vehicle to disable the vehicle. Officers shall not discharge a firearm from a moving vehicle. The recommendation is to add, unless it is otherwise consistent with this policy regarding the use of deadly force, and also explain that part. And our response to this was a little bit further clarification needed because there's already the entire section of 300.6.1, which covers deadly force in the policy. That applies throughout. It doesn't go away just because we're talking about shooting at moving vehicles. Like deadly force, using a firearm is deadly force, and that has to be met regardless. This is just a short caveat, just about shooting at or from moving vehicles and prohibiting it in most circumstances. So I'm not sure if there's any more clarity you guys can provide on exactly what the recommendation is there. The recommendation was to add, unless it is otherwise consistent with this policy regarding the use of deadly force, and also the operator or occupant poses an imminent threat of death or serious bodily injury to the public or an officer by means other than the vehicle, and the officer is unable to get out of the way. So it looks like the recommendation is to just add that language, unless it is otherwise consistent with this policy regarding the use of deadly force, which is already, the use of deadly force it has to be met within policy. It doesn't go away just because we move down to 300.21. It still applies even though it's,
It sounds to me like you exactly understand the recommendation. And then maybe that's just a thing that we didn't understand, is that the deadly force general section, I can just call it that, would be universally applicable even in this specific scenario. So that in a situation where, let's say, there was a review of somebody shooting at or from a moving vehicle, if you go to this section and say, all right, did they comply with number one? Yes. Did they comply with number two? Yes. All right, well then we're good. Yet they totally didn't comply with the general section, that might be missed, that it was not in line with policy.
okay.
And so as we were going through it, we felt it would be appropriate to reference back to the generally applicable policy and also factors 1 and 2. But if you're saying that generally applicable is just understood, that that's always applicable, and then these are additional requirements, I think that still satisfies the concern that we have.
And that's 100%. Right. And that's why at the very beginning of the policy, it says shooting at a moving vehicle is deadly force. I mean, we could add, shooting at a moving vehicle is deadly force as it concerns policy section 300.6.1.
Yeah, reference.
Or as defined.
Or as defined earlier in this policy, something of that sort. So we could add that, it wouldn't change it.
In the general use of force section, you can put this is applicable throughout the entire policy and maybe address it there.
Well, I think that's lined out in the initial values. The values in the opening statement is that this policy applies to all members of the Bakersfield Police Department, and no one part of the policy goes away just because we're reading another part of the policy. Like the use of force policy applies on all levels of use of force. And there are specific outlined parts, for intermediate force, for deadly force, but the use of deadly force is going to have to be met through the main policy. The use of deadly force section has to be met, and the use of deadly force is the use of deadly force. And that's why it's made clear that shooting at a moving vehicle is deadly force. And it has to be met through that part of the policy. But again, it wouldn't hurt to reference that
Reference back.
Right at the top.
Just add it.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's the last further clarification needed. Again,
Clarification for that last one on business and tactics.
you're not allowed to ask
The matrix you're talking about, there's thoughts, either clear or contaminated, emotions, high or low, and then behaviors, compliant, non-compliant, which helps officers. This is not something like they would have a sheet when they're looking at their suspect. This is just something as we teach them, it helps them evaluate. Oh, we probably need to use crisis communication, a de-escalation technique. So those kind of those factors we were talking about.
And it's really because we expect a lot from our officers, but we don't expect them to be physicians and diagnose people. We can't expect that an officer is going to go out and be able to mentally diagnose somebody that they're in contact with in the streets. So that's why we give them their thoughts, emotions, and behaviors, and it's a 50-50. Their thoughts are clear, contaminated, their emotions are high or low, and their behaviors are compliant or non-compliant. And from there, there's a matrix on how they should respond and adjust their response to that. But again, those are one of the documents that we can provide to you guys to take a look at.
But I want to emphasize Tabitha's recommendation that the continuous, assessment, because maybe at the first stop, it's fine, but for whatever reason, just the interaction hypes this person or causes them to whatever respond in a way where you automatically think that, oh, well, they're already, not complying or resisting and move into a more severe engagement. So you worded it very differently, but just that idea that even just the contact with law enforcement could, maybe not immediately be identified as somebody's going through some kind of crisis, but because of that contact, however long they're engaging, can move into that. And so just continuous assessment as throughout the interaction with the individual.
It might not be even the officer, somebody else could have entered the scene that upsets them, not you, but you. You know what I'm saying? And so all of that.
There's definitely, we'll take a look at it and see what kind of things we find.
Yeah, semantics.
It is a lot of semantics.
A lot of semantics.
All right, thank you guys. We're going to go ahead and move forward with this next piece.
Bagby with the Bakersfield Police Department Performance and Analysis Division. Tonight, we're honored to discuss a vital aspect of our accountability program, the Bakersfield Police Department's Officer-Involved Critical Incidents Policy. Considering aspects of the stipulated judgment, along with our ongoing self-evaluation of our policies and procedures in these areas, we've made some critical changes to our OICI policies.
Yeah, it's frozen.
Procedures. This presentation highlights some of the key ideas and new changes in the policies. Key policy changes include defined purpose and role of the CIRB. It articulates the scope of the CIRB's review, clearly defines a critical incident, ensures thorough, unbiased, neutral, and consistent review. Critical incidents, and codifies an important continuous evaluation and improvement framework. Let's start by exploring the purpose and scope of this policy. This section outlines the department's commitment to identifying critical incidents and establishing protocols for its investigation and reporting. Additionally, this policy convenes the Critical Incident Review Board, a crucial law enforcement body tasked with ensuring accountability and driving policy improvement based on incident review. It's important to understand the policy's overarching objectives. The Bakersfield PD aims to conduct thorough, unbiased investigations of officer-involved incidents, ensure legal compliance, and adhere to department policy. This policy is central to the department's commitment to fostering a culture of legitimate accountability and continuous improvement to improve future outcomes for everyone involved. Additionally, the policy clearly defines what constitutes a critical incident and what procedures are triggered throughout the investigation and review process. By understanding what constitutes a critical incident, we can better grasp the department's approach to incident classification and response. Outlining the procedures and their goals and scope ensures consistency, fairness, and transparency for the community and the officers involved. As you review the policy, important updates to take note of include updates to the notification section, the critical incident investigation, removal from assignment, the command briefing, prosecutorial review, and the board's composition. Notifications. Immediate notification of potential critical incidents to higher authorities ensures swift response and allocation of necessary resources. This proactive approach is essential for maintaining public trust and ensuring transparency. This policy discusses the protocols for initiating and maintaining the integrity of investigative procedures while supporting all stakeholder interests. during this critical phase. Open communication channels are vital during such challenging times. Critical incident investigation. This section outlines the procedures for conducting thorough investigations following departmental policy and legal standards. It is crucial to ensure that investigations are fair, objective, and comprehensive. This policy clearly defines the roles of criminal administrative investigations, investigators, and how they complement each other to ensure a holistic review of incidents, addressing legal and policy compliance. Removal from duty assignment. When incidents result in significant harm or loss of life, temporary assignments, including administrative leave, may be necessary. This ensures that involved employees receive the necessary support and that the integrity of investigations is maintained. Additionally, the policy discusses the department's emphasis on employee wellness and support services during and after critical incidents. The well-being of officers and personnel is paramount to fostering a healthy and resilient workforce. Supporting employee wellness, apart from being the right thing to do, is shown to translate directly to the quality of an officer's performance and how they relate to the community around them. Employees who experience a strong sense of organizational justice and internal empathy show greater empathy and engagement in procedural justice and related desired outcomes in several academic studies. Finally, the policy explicitly outlines how the department will handle critical incidents when a criminal act is suspected by employees. When a criminal act is identified or suspected, the Kern County's District Attorney's Office is involved and the investigation is turned over for their immediate consideration. Command briefing. The initial briefing within 72 hours of a critical incident is crucial in the investigative process. It allows for disseminating factual information and identifying immediate actions needed to address concerns with the information that is available. The policy highlights goals and actions of the command briefing, including roles and responsibilities. The department established this process to codify its long-standing practice of addressing immediate policy issues to ensure objectivity and establish clear guidelines for the scope of the command briefing. This early communication helps ensure better processes and faster iterative evaluation and, hopefully, builds trust with the community and internal stakeholders. Prosecutorial review. In cases where criminal acts are suspected, the department collaborates with the Kern County District Attorney's Office for independent review. This ensures accountability and upholds the rule of law. Additionally, every case is ultimately reviewed by the Kern County District Attorney's Office to ensure accountability and transparency. This policy emphasizes the importance of independent review in maintaining public trust and confidence in the criminal justice system. Critical Incident Review Board composition. This section provides insight into the board's composition, including voting and advisory members. Diversity and representation ensures comprehensive reviews that reflect various perspectives, interests, and concerns. The department demonstrates its commitment to evaluation and accountability by involving various stakeholders in the review process. This diversity is key to accountability and continuous improvement. Conclusion. In conclusion, we've briefly explored the Bakersfield Police Department's officer-involved critical incident policy updates and their reflected commitment to accountability, transparency, and continuous improvement. Clear policies about when and how an officer-involved critical incident investigation is triggered, how the review is conducted, specific investigative and review milestones, key decision points, and identifying and acting on important improvement opportunities are central to ensuring justice, accountability, and better future outcomes. We look forward to a fruitful and enlightening discussion on this policy. Where to begin? Any thoughts? Questions? Discussion points early on? I just found out that this is or is not in the conveyance.
It's on conveyor, there was no comments or questions that we had started to get the conversation going.
You said
We
that,
just finished
earlier
that.
that
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, sir.
you said the review board, one of your goals was to create diversity on the board. So how do you accomplish that?
Yeah, so traditionally, the review board, the BPD has been exclusively commands that captains, assistant chiefs. What we've done is we've included chain of command for the people involved, as well as supervisors and rank and file officers as part of the review board, as well as a representative always from internal affairs, it's independent from the voting process. Somebody from quality assurance, independent from the voting process, and somebody from training and logistics, independent of the voting process. They serve in like an advisory capacity.
And how long, what's the length of their serving on the board?
Those roles all serve on the board for the duration of that critical incident itself. So each board is convened separately for each critical incident. Now, those roles stay the same, and there are command staff people on all of them. And since we're not that big of a department, there's overlap on every board. Typically, it's mostly the same people, but where you get some of the diversity is from the individual chain of command, a supervisor, and a rank and file officer. And those can be mix and match, and they can be changed from board to board, et cetera.
Do you avoid officers that were involved in the incident?
I'm sorry?
Do you avoid officers?
Oh, certainly. They can't be involved at all. The chain of command, so it's a good question because I want to make sure we're clear. The chain of command, so the lieutenant, captain of the officer's unit can be, unless they were involved in some way and there would be some kind of conflict of interest, right? It's a good question. Thank you.
When you say voting, can you tell, when you say voting, what is the process? Is that every person gets a vote as to, can you explain the vote?
Yeah. So when practically, maybe Chief Stratton would rather talk this one. I don't mind doing it. Sure.
Sure. Yeah. So each person in there will that's a portion of the board is able to give their recommendation to the chief as to whether this is within policy, whether within our opinion it's within policy, whether within our opinion it's within the framework of the law, and then we make a recommendation to the chief, and it's there can be recommendations from, like the board could be split. You could have some people saying, hey, I think this is within policy, and others that don't, and then there's a document that's authored to the chief. But we have a variety of other people that are in there that have a certain amount of expertise. I can think of sometimes we've had critical incidents involving vehicle fatalities, and there's just a certain level of expertise that people who investigate traffic have that I might not have because I never worked in traffic. So we can have them as a part of the review board to be able to give some of that information and some of that context, but they may not necessarily be able to give the overall recommendation. So generally speaking, it's the command staff. So on almost everyone, both the assistant chiefs will be in there. We try to have almost all of our 6 captains, unless somebody's off, be a part of it, and then we'll add the additional lieutenants, sergeants, detectives if appropriate.
Can I add one thing?
Sure.
It's not really a vote. It's not a great phrase to use because they're not taking a majority vote, ayes and nays. All of the quote-unquote members of the board can express their opinion. I concur, I dissent with this, and then that gets written into the actual memo. So for instance, if 5, let's say it's a board of 6, I guess, if 5 captains said, well, I think this is good to go, it's in policy, it's within the law, et cetera, and the 6th says, I disagree because of these reasons, both of those things get documented and presented to the chief as part of the final recommendation. So it would be, these 5 said that, this one said that, you decide based on that outcome.
I have one question for you. Who's in the board? Who nominate or who's elect?
Sure. Yeah, so as a part of our the main group that's in every single one of them are both assistant chiefs and six, generally each of the six captains, unless they're off for some reason, are all a part of the board. There may be additional people that come and go, but generally there's 8 of us that are there every, on every single one.
So how long the board gonna be select for, 1 year, 2 years, what's their duration?
Yeah, no, for as long as we're, at the very least, while we're in our position. So, if a captain or an assistant chief retires and there's a promotion, somebody will go into that board, into that position. But then based on whatever that critical incident is, we can add certain people to the board as well. But at least the 8 of us, by virtue of our assignments and our positions, are expected to maintain a position on the board.
So your recommendation?
It's okay. When you say there is no board, if there is any confliction happen, so
Yes.
what happens?
Yeah, so if there's a conflict, those, like, some might be in favor, some might be opposed. There's an opinion and a dissenting opinion. Both of those are written and they're presented to the chief. We're all in a position that none of us are making the decision. We can make a recommendation to the chief. In our opinion, we believe this is within policy. In our opinion, we believe this is within the framework of the law. But we give those recommendations to the chief, who makes their opinion as well. And then the review board presentation is forwarded to the district attorney's office, who makes the ultimate recommendation about whether, in their opinion, something is within the law or not. We feel comfortable being able to make the determination about whether something is in policy or not, but whether it's in the framework of the law, it's an opinion that we have. And then when it's all said and done, that the entirety is sent over to the district attorney's office, who makes the legal recommendation on their own.
How much of the process is open to the public? By that I mean, is revealed to the public?
The document itself is something that's available. We're taken and posted to the website.
You mean the document, you mean your findings?
Yes, sir. The findings, and then all of the critical incident review boards, once they're closed, are publicly accessible. So these are all things that, as we're working towards being able to have a component of the website, that it's there and you can go to it. You can read the entirety of the report. You can see the entirety of the information. You can read the entirety of the thought process as it relates to the review board's recommendations to the chief, and then the chief's signature. So it should all be publicly available.
Hey, sorry, I want to clarify this real quick. Not currently functioning in the way that you described, it's something we're working toward. So right now, you would have to request that information for each of these incidents, and we would give it to you. But it's the way he's describing it, where you can go straight to the website and grab it and bring it out and look at all of it. It doesn't work that way. It's just a matter of catching up with the old records and getting the technology stuff sorted out, et cetera. But the list of cases is available, and you can go and pick one and do like a Public Records Act request, basically. And you would get the entire investigation for an officer involved shooting or a public fatality, et cetera, which includes all the things you described. Eventually, the idea is that you just go to the website, pick the one you want to see, and download it, and you can have all of them at one time if you want. But it's a lot. I mean, these cases are hundreds and hundreds of pages. And that would not, even that format doesn't include like the audio recordings and things like that. You still have to request one, just because it's not practical. So much service. Sir?
Yeah, so what's released to the public when this rolls out will be the dissenting and majority opinion before it gets sent to the chief, or once the chief has already signed off on this sort of stuff. Because currently we hear like the last part, right? It was within policies. And then I have another question. Sort of.
Yeah. So, okay, good question. Clarity is important. When the chief has signed off on the whole case and has made a finding, the whole case, from the investigative reports, internal affairs reports, the findings from the review board, chief's opinion, after action stuff, that's all publicly available, right? And it's not available before the case is closed.
I just want to know.
No, that's a good question, because I sort of, yeah, we skipped a step in there, kind of. Go ahead. Your other question was?
Another question was related to, so in terms of, this entire process develops essentially an investigation, which would be an internal investigation, police investigating themselves, and then that investigation in its totality gets sent to the DA, who then has to use the internal police investigation. I just want to make sure I'm getting it right.
Yeah.
Right, to determine whether this is legal, not within policy. That's what
Yeah, so there's two investigations actually that run concurrently. Okay? And you can really think of it as three. The first one is the criminal investigation. It deals with, there's a shooting, let's say, officer-involved shooting. That's the most common application of this, right? So the criminal investigation does two things. It gathers all the facts related to the underlying crime, all the facts about what physically happened at the time, all the forensic evidence, all of those things. Concurrently and collaboratively, in a sense, it's complicated because of POBAR, the Police Officers' Bill of Rights, the internal affairs investigation runs concurrently to that, where the criminal investigation is quote-unquote complete. So that would be the part that the DA would get to find out if it's legal, et cetera, right? The internal investigation would cover policy, administrative issues, after action stuff. And by after action stuff, I mean policy issues, things that we didn't know about that contributed to the shooting, or internal stuff, like it's things as simple as better equipment options, better vehicle stuff, radio traffic. There's a ton of options that can go into that. Staffing, response to an OIS, health, things like that. Those all run internally, concurrently to the criminal investigation. But all of that is publicly releasable, back to the previous thing. But the DA only gets the criminal side, if you want to call it that, of that investigation. Does that make sense?
Let me insert a little bit in there too. When a critical incident occurs, the district attorney's office is notified. And so they have the ability to conduct a portion of they're observing and conducting their own criminal investigation in conjunction with the police department throughout the entirety of it. So the first time that they see this is not when they get the report at the very end. There's a notification that's made the night of, and whether they send an investigator out at that point or in the days after, they liaise with the police department. So there is a component where the police department is conducting this investigation, but the district attorney's office is conducting some overview and oversight of it, simultaneous and contemporaneous throughout the entirety of it as well.
Yeah, you want to do it or you want me to?
Really quickly, David, I have a question.
Well, timeline, I think the frustration from the community could be the timeline, right? I know it's a big incident, it could take you months to do this, but is there a timeline that you guys try to
Yeah, it's
work
great.
it into?
Yeah, so,
Yeah,
go for it.
Go
for it.
Okay, so it's funny that you say it frustrates the community. If you were inside, it frustrates the people in the building as well. What we've done with this policy is we've attached timeframes, milestones to the process, and it's a 30, 60, 90 framework. So the first briefing that we do is actually within a few days. It's supposed to be within 72 hours ideally. It's called a command briefing. That's where we kind of gather the initial part of the board and find out what's going on with the investigation, what the facts are, what the investigative needs are, things like that. We start talking about employee status, being off of work and stuff like that. Within the next 30 days, or within 30 days of the incident, we have kind of a follow-up to that, which is the criminal investigation done? What's the status? What's going on? Who's doing what? What's holding this thing up, if anything? And then within 60 days, the board itself convenes. And it can all happen faster, but you also have to remember in a lot of these investigations, things we don't control that are not publicly seen. For instance, lab reports, DNA stuff, things like that. So within 60 days, assuming that we're able to, the board convenes and goes through its process. And then within 90 days, the after action reports, final decisions, everything's all finished and released. That's the ideal scenario.
And while we want it to be as fast and efficient as possible, these mirror the similar timelines that homicide investigations take. If it was not officer involved, it takes 30, 60, 90, 120 days to wrap up homicide investigations. By the time you're dealing with coroner's office and autopsies and, like I said, lab results and toxicology reports and gathering information, there is a component where it takes time to conduct the regular investigation. And so, like the LT said, within 72 hours, it's really a chance for the command team, those that are going to be on the review board, the investigators, to gather and understand what happens. Because if something were to happen right now, there's a homicide team that's going to go out there, internal affairs is going to go out there, but we're not going to know. We're not going to know what's happening. We might hear bits and pieces of it, but we don't really have any idea. So within 3 days, it's a chance for the kind of the command group to understand what was the call, what was happening, and have some of that laid down. Then within 30 days, we feel like that's a good amount of time to understand and start to figure out what exactly are we dealing with here. And then ideally, within that 90 days, we should start being able to have some of these reports back and start to make some determinations. And again, that's really consistent with, a non-police related homicide or something that would occur. Sometimes the timelines are compressed, but it's a pretty consistent timeline.
But then sometimes they'll release body-worn camera footage earlier than the 90 days.
Right, and that's something we didn't cover at all. It's a great point. So ideally, within 30 days, no later than 45 days of the incident occurring, we try to do a
community briefing.
What's it called?
Community briefing.
Sorry, I always get the wrong name for some of this stuff. Try to do the community debrief is what it's called. The community debrief, which is the video release with some information and things like that, depending on what we can't release, depending on where the investigation is at the time.
Yep, and trying to release that information to be able to inform the public as to what happened, so the public knows what we know, but also recognizing that it is an open criminal investigation, and that if you're releasing information that is going to be used at trial, should there be prosecution or anything like that, we're creating some issues for ourselves and releasing some of that information preliminarily as well.
You were saying?
Question. You said that it gets referred to the DA's office if there's a suspicion of criminal activity. But it also, I think I heard you say that they get notified right away.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
So who and when is that determination made about
Yeah,
whether there's a suspicion?
Initially, they're going to come out to be a part of the investigation, to send investigators that are out. But while detectives are investigating, if the detectives are recognizing, hey, we have a crime here, then we're not going to wait for the 90 days and for the review board to get together to write our memo, to submit it to the chief, to then let the district attorney's office know that, hey, we think there's a crime here. If, as detectives are investigating this thing within this 30-day framework, within this 72-hour framework, and they realize we've got a crime, we have something inappropriate, then it needs to get routed to the DA's office well before the review board ever gets together. And that's a component of the 72-hour, the 30-day component. That way, if something's happening, we're taking action on it and not waiting till we all get together to write our memo to make a determination about that.
One of the things that it's mentioned in the presentation specifically is that our policy before alluded to these different phases, but didn't really address them specifically. So it's a statement that if criminal activity is suspected, it's immediately referred, but it's still referred as a matter of course at the end, even if there is not, if that makes sense. So it's just kind of a qualifier. So anyone who reads the policy is aware that we don't wait exactly for that question, 90 days to decide if there's going to be a crime issue, that we didn't wait that long. Go ahead,
As it relates to criminal prosecution specifically as well, don't forget that there's another element, another layer involved as it relates with the state attorney general's office. So again, pursuant to current law, where the government code has been amended, is that any event in which an unarmed civilian is shot and killed, or even not shot, but killed during use of force, the state attorney general's office is the lead investigator on the criminal side of things. So we make that notification immediately. We have had those circumstances since that law took effect. In fact, you may remember it was last month, we had the first one back in 2021, talking about timelines, how that comes into play as well. 3 years passed before the first one from the state attorney general's office was cleared, but that was just released last month. So that also then triggers when we can then pick up or complete our administrative investigation. Because we want to obviously wait for obvious reasons to make sure that what we're we're discovering is also based on the facts of the criminal investigation the state has discovered. So it's another factor that's involved.
Cool. Anyone else? Anything else? It's way easier than last time. What's that? Oh, you didn't do your homework. That's funny. Yes, ma'am.
If an officer is let go or something, is there an announcement made of that? I mean, how would we never know? I mean, I've only, in all the years I've been working with police, in 7 years since I've been working with police issues, I probably can only remember one, maybe twice that we've ever heard. I mean, I'm not saying we should make a big deal out of it, but maybe we have to look at the report. What would we have to do to find out?
Yeah. Chief, you want to address that one?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm running through my mind of all the terminations that we've had, which are, it's there. I don't know that we've ever done a press release on it or anything like that. So, yeah, open to feedback about how we'd be able to close that loop better, to give that information. Open to hearing about how we could best do that.
We have done our press releases when prosecution is, when prosecution, when an officer is being prosecuted, for instance, you have to do releases on those based on the discovery of the critical incident review prior to the completion of it. An officer being prosecuted, we make those notifications to me as well.
Yes, and as it relates to formalized discipline, we're a little bit limited based on the government code about what we can ultimately release and what we can ultimately say about somebody's discipline. And oftentimes termination is a component of discipline. So we're a little bit limited, but we're open to the recommendations about what we might be able to do to help share what we can.
I did 6 different jurisdictions, I worked with 6 different departments, and it's kind of like, I think we have to talk about the rights, which is part of the problem, right? Part of it is the But I mean, it really, I think it's important because the community's ideas that nothing's ever happened to them.
Yeah.
That's really the attitude most people have.
For sure.
They want to hear it.
Yeah, no, that's good. Like I said, we're open to recommendations about how we could best share what we're able to share. There was one more over here. Z, do you have a question?
It's just, it's a difficult balance, I would
It is.
say, and because, I mean, we are dealing with human beings and they may have done something wrong. We want to have media attention to continue to point out, like, they did. So it would help the department, I'm assuming, to the optics that yes, something happens, but at the same time, this is somebody's life that has probably been ruined.
Sure. Yeah, it's a balance, and that's what we're open to recommendations about how we might be able to do that.
And you were talking about employee wellness. I mean, if employees don't feel like they
Sure.
have their department behind them. I mean, like I said, I mean, there's so many competing.
Yeah.
What's interesting now too is the decertification stuff. We haven't really crossed that bridge.
Yeah, finding ways to make employees feel supported, but the public to have confidence in the process. That doesn't have to be mutually exclusive, but at times may be. And so that's a difficult balance to be able to find, but we're open to be able to attacking that for sure. And like the LT said, there are different laws in place now and some oversight from the state as it relates to decertification of police officers and things like that. That's all public as well. And so when some of these investigations may be sustained, or we have a certain finding that it's outside of policy and outside of the law, then certain notifications are made to the state, at which point certifications are taken. And again, but to your point, ma'am, is that how do we close that gap? Unless you go to specifically the state's website and look for it and see it, how do we announce it? And so we're open to ways to be able to do that.
Probably only ask the same one. I know you're probably going to have the same answer. It's only department who's critical. There's no outside people that could participate that provide a different perspective, professionals that give a different perspective. Because again, we all know that working in this group, you'll have a certain perspective and bias on. And so your interpretation of the situation might be different than not necessarily a lay person. We had this topic, we had this discussion last time.
So two things I'll say. One, in this scenario, the current scenario where it is right now, Deborah Kirby and her team, and County OJ, sit in on our critical incident.
Guilty.
So there is some,
Yeah, trust me, there's all kinds of arguments. But, part two of that statement is that you have a big boss here to address the concern of things, whereas last time it sort of batted it around as best they could, but now he's here, so you can talk a little bit.
The whole idea about that, there still is an ongoing debate on the efficacy of that. There's probably 200 different ways to do it across the country. Just about every place it's done, you can't find a replicate of that somewhere else. It's a little different.
right.
There's all these different ways, and I think there's more evidence emerging probably that is identifying of some positive trends in terms of levels of force and uses of force or complaints that might support that it's more effective than what we previously believed, but not exclusively, because there's also some studies and some evidence that shows that the community, this is more a kind of a civilian oversight versus what you've probably been talking about, but that the civilian oversight tends to reduce or give officers lower levels of punishment than what the department would have done. And so, I mean, there's some evidence on that side as well. So it's something we're constantly looking at. And then, because Brent and I were talking about this today or yesterday, was how do we explore the curiosity that we have? Do you have people involved in it? Do you have an outside person investigating it? Do you have an outsider just audit it? There's a lot of different ways I think that could manifest itself in terms of having an outside view, an outside perspective. Some counties have DA, district attorney shooting teams that investigate critical incidents it's a multi-agency team that goes in all of the different communities within that county and they investigate them. And there's a lot of different ways it's being done. You know, our county has talked about it, but we're not a big enough county. You'd end up with the BPD kind of and the sheriff's department probably investigating all of the other ones because they're not big enough to do that. So very curious about it, and it is something that we're exploring about because most of the places where you look at it, it's different. It's depending on what that community wants, what that community expects, what the needs or the concerns of that community. And so just about every place that it exists, it's a little bit different. I mean, that's a simplification of it, certainly, but it is something that we're curious about and are looking about. How do we do that? Is that something our community wants? How do we do it while ensuring the confidence of the officers? Because that's critical as well. And so, can you accomplish both of those things? Yeah, probably.
But in our unique circumstances, we're all here to develop more community. We're
Right.
all here to develop transparency. And that could be a very strong message to the community that we're not investigating ourselves. We have other people with different perspectives that are also looking at these situations.
And I've had that conversation with somebody, and they go, yes, and somebody you're paying is investigating. They have a contract with you.
Right.
They have an interest in making sure that they do good work so that you'll continue to pay them. A community member and I were talking about that, and it was kind of like, yes, but so how much confidence can we really have if you go select this people and you're paying them, they're going to give you the outcomes that you want? He was intentionally being cynical about it, but what I'm saying is there's arguments all around on both sides of that. I don't think it's a really settled science or academic that says it one way or the other, these are the better outcomes. I think it's trending in a particular direction as we learn a little bit more about it, but it's still very much debated. But again, what does our community want? What does our community expect? And what would meet that need, that concern? And I have some curiosity about that.
You can have a meeting about it.
Well, other professions, right, have review teams, right? I mean,
And for critical incidents, we send it to the district attorney for them to review it. Okay, many would argue that's not independent at all. But they have to decide whether there's a criminal case. And there is some accountability. I mean, you have to get elected. The public is going to weigh in on how they think you're doing your job. But I know that doesn't really meet the meaning of the concerns that people have. And so it is something I'm curious about.
You know, it's not a bad idea to look at what other professions are doing. Are there other professions that have somebody outside of that profession that judge what they do that I could?
Not outside the profession, probably.
Probably, well, or like a grand jury in which a board is elected and meets annually, or is at your disposal annually. Grand jury, I mean, there's volunteers that have, I'm just exploring
One thing that comes
ideas.
to mind for me is with, I think it's not just CBCR, but at least statewide, the Inspector General's office is people that have expertise in the area. It's a separate agency, and they come in. I know when there's allegations of correctional officer misconduct, there's a whole arm of the Attorney General's office that, lack of a better word,
It's like their internal affairs, right?
prosecutes the CEO, and then there's a separate wing of it that defends the CEO and their correctional officer in their internal issue, and it's all overseen by the Inspector General. I mean, that's an enormous apparatus that doesn't exist here.
No, but Brent was talking about that when we were having the conversation of, could you end up with an Inspector General version of it here, where it's an independent arm independent of the department, but accountable to the city or the city council, and responsible for that kind of review and oversight. Perhaps not just of the police department, but of
KCS
could be, or all of some of the other city departments. Are we funding the right things in the right way? And, I mean, those are more council, but is there some assurance that what the council's direction, what the city's requesting is actually being done and fulfilled? Is there a financial, integrity or whatever else? So, again, I have some curiosity about what that looks like. But we're very much, very heavily invested in trying to be connected with what other departments are doing. Chris in particular is involved in a lot of things across the country. He's on research boards and really paying attention to the academics, to the science of what's coming out about behaviors, the way we think, processes, techniques. 4 of us just went to Madison, Wisconsin a few weeks ago in June, looking at their community policing practices and things. And so we're connected in a lot of different ways. I went to Scotland in June of last year and spent a week, and we spent a lot of time focusing on most of their officers are unarmed. How are they doing it? Now they don't have the same level of threat but is there something for us to learn there in terms of how they're teaching? When it gets really complicated, and I'm not sending us off the rail here, but you go for years to college before you ever then you go to police academy, and so there's a whole different thing, but they were teaching with tasers and the de-escalation, and we saw a scenario of how they had a barricaded suspect and how they handled it, and not a single person was armed there, right? And the person was armed with a knife and throwing things, and so it was interesting to watch. So my point is that we're trying to leverage and be connected to everything so that we're informed, and having conversations and exploring things and challenging ourselves a little bit too. So part of this process is these kinds of conversations that spur thought. But I'm telling you all this so that you can, again, have a little bit more information and a little bit of confidence that we're not trying to do this in a bubble, that we are really actively looking at and challenging ourselves in ways to be responsible, to make sure that we can fulfill our responsibilities that the committee has for us in these very, very basic ways, but that we're also making sure that we can do it, that we're evolving and utilizing contemporary practices in the way that we teach, in the way that we think, in the way that we hire, and all of those kinds of things. And so it's it's not in a singular focus. I mean, we're trying to look across the board about how we do all of these kinds of things. And so when it comes to community involvement and oversight of critical incidents, the review of the investigation, I have some curiosity about what that could look like here. And, is it supported in some way that we would design that there is some evidence to say that this is a good method or a good way to do that?
We've spent some time looking what Los Angeles PD does with their oversight. We spent some time looking at what Riverside has done in some of their areas as well. So we are looking at what some of those models could look like and how they're functioning or not functioning in some, yeah, they're dysfunctioning in some places.
Questions or minutes? Anything else we need to discuss?
I just have one bit regarding the next policy. Anything else? On the schedule that I had previously sent out, our next policy coming up was the limited English proficiency policy. So Maya Smith is our lead on that team, and she's unavailable. So I'm going to bump her down and replace hers with our public reporting of the police officer policy. It's a very short policy. I think it's 4 pages. So I'll be posting that today. That'll be the only policy that gets posted. So just an update on that. If anybody wants an updated schedule with that change, or if you just want to scratch it on the one that I sent out, let me know. I can send it out again. That's all I have.
All right, anything else from staff members?
I've got a question about the timing. So by our next meeting, is that when we would anticipate having our comments about the critical incident policy?
Yes.
Hold on. You're referencing this one, Jacob?
The criminal.
No, I was referencing the critical incident we just talked about.
No, that would be October 8th.
Okay, what are we submitting our comments about by next?
Use of force reporting and accountability would be September 20th.
I mean, a few of us who have been in the work group we're just talking about the timeline. It just feels a lot. We have been, and I know you guys were engaging in emails, and I did not read the latest threads, but I think something that you have mentioned in the past was it could be flexible, so we're not feeling like we're just jumping from policy to policy. I think some of us, and myself included, didn't have a chance to participate in all of the work group because it is a lot. But I'm just curious to hear from others of whether that timeline has worked, or especially since on BPD's end, it is taking a little bit longer to accept those recommendations or review people's recommendations. I'm wondering, how can we bring back this, really focus on timeline? Because right now we submitted 3 policies. Did everyone get a chance to read those additional 3 policies? I know, last night at midnight I was submitting my comments. But just going back to the idea that, people who really want to spend time to have those conversations, and I feel like it's helpful. I mean, I missed a few of the work group meetings, but whenever I'm engaged, I participate in those, the folks who are there generally have questions, like, how am I interpreting this? How are my family and my community interpreting this language? And so, I don't know, I don't know what I'm asking, but I'm curious to hear people who are engaging with that policy, whether that timeline is helpful, especially because we are volunteering our time.
Right, so this week, if I again, I have been with MIA lately. What were we supposed to house turn by today? Was the handcuffing conducted in G Williams? The handcuffing over license and techniques. Okay, so those were supposed to be submitted, because personally I haven't had a chance to review those. I mean, I was here for the presentation and nothing stood out. And these last two meetings were pretty, we were able to discuss them. But as far as putting anything pen to paper, I haven't had an opportunity to do that. So that's just my personal.
So just a couple food for thought. This was 3 policies in this next one. Moving forward, it's all a single policy at a time, correct? And again, the idea behind the framework is that they're posted to the mail. A month later, there's the presentation, and then a month later, there's a response. So essentially, there's 2 months.
Yeah.
It's posted to Conveo. A month later, we either present or discuss, depending on who's watched the video. And then 2 months after that is when the recommendations will be given.
So essentially, there's 3 months of review time before the recommendations, or 4 months, sorry, 3 months before the recommendations are due. So I think maybe with the 3 policies that created some frustration, moving forward, it's a single policy. So essentially, you have 4 months to review a single policy and provide recommendations. Use of force, I think maybe isn't necessarily the best example, as in it's 400 recommendations. That would be a lot for anybody to respond to. Looking at what I see for like handcuffing, that's more of a reasonable number. And again, one policy moving forward, I think we are going to find a flow that's going to make more sense. I think just this transition is going to be difficult. But just some food for thought in that discussion, of course. Everyone, please provide your opinion, but I just want to give some context. Really quickly, one more sentence.
We got that. There's only one going forward that is still in development, and it's the search and seizure policy. I haven't seen the final version yet. I heard that they're going to break it into 4 sections: a general policy, residential search and seizure policy, a vehicle search and seizure policy, and then person search and seizure policy. I don't know if each one is just going to be a couple pages. I haven't seen it yet. So when you look on the schedule, that just says 1. If they're all longer policies, then I'll break that into different meetings. But that's the only one I see coming up that could be either multiple small policies or one big policy, and we'll just have to wait until I get that policy from them to see what it actually looks like.
Author for all these policies, because it seems to be very disjointed. And it becomes like, okay, the definition is this over here, and then it's inconsistent in this policy, and we're having to review all the little details. We're respecting our time also. If there's one author that previews everything, then gives it to us, it'll help us out a lot.
So for each topic, there's teams that are working on it.
Okay.
But I'm not sure if you're talking about like for different topics. So like Sergeant Bishop is not going to come back and talk about personnel complaints. That'll be a different team that's working on that project.
But I think last, and we emailed regarding one specific policy, but the idea that maybe is there like a policy expert who is maybe going and reviewing the final draft version you guys are submitting, understanding that it's per department or per unit, but just so I guess the definition is understood throughout the policy, because the definition for one thing is not going to change within different units. I mean, that's an example, but I think there was one where we just had a lot of like questions. So yeah, because I think our recommendation after a few pages was like, can we send it back, or actually can you guys look at it again and bring it back to us, because right now it's just grammatical errors. So I like the suggestion of, is there like a policy expert that can just do like a run through that the language is consistent throughout whatever policy?
I will tell you, you should not get something that's what you described.
Oh, we got it. We got it.
I'm telling you, you shouldn't. I'm telling you, you shouldn't. So
somebody else wrote this when they were sleeping.
So, no, we actually talked about that today, so clearly, because it goes through not just us, it goes through multiple places before it ever comes to you. So that, I don't know how that happened, but no, we don't intend to deliver that kind of product. So, but to your point about consistent terms and terminology or definitions, I think that's something we could definitely pay a little bit closer attention to do that. So keep raising them when you see them, please, but no, you should get something that's a workable document.
Well, sorry, you had your hand up.
I've talked more than anybody else, so go ahead.
No, but I guess, I don't know if, because like you said, Tara, they didn't have a chance to engage with all of the policies that are due today. Is there flexibility in that, for other folks who, I know that, again, the work group, we kind of got, crawled through the end, but in case we like, hey, we really needed to, could update a comment here and there, is there flexibility on that?
How that would work would be similar to like the addendum report. The recommendations I'm going to compile them tomorrow. By the end of the week, I'm going to send a formal report just like I did last time to DPD. Any recommendations we receive afterwards, I will put together an addendum report and it will get sent. It just may not get responded to in the same time frame. So for example, BPD is really making an effort to respond to all 400 comments. That's why they're taking a little bit more time. I wouldn't expect that to be the rule. It'll just come in a separate report, essentially. So if you feel like you won't have to make more comments, go ahead and make them. It will be an addendum to that original report, but the report is going to go out this week. So we're maintaining our pace, but there is nothing saying like if you submit a recommendation on one of these other policies next week, that I'm going to be like, no, we're done.
Yeah.
We're not going to accept it. It'll just be an addendum to that report, and then they're going to have more time to be able to respond. We do want to maintain, we got to have a goal. We got to be working in a direction. We have to have a plan. Not having a plan is not us not moving anywhere. But again, I think the working group is a wonderful thing, but it also can't be the rule. Everyone is not mandatory. Everyone does not have to participate. And the working group can't be the barometer of how we operate necessarily. I think we have to have a process that is how we move forward, whether someone wants to participate in the working group or not. If we don't do that, then we alienate other members of the group. And the point is to make sure that we get as much response as possible. So I think that's also something important to remember. We have to stick to the process. That's the rules. There will be exceptions and we'll work through them. And I think that is a fair compromise. Everyone's recommendations are going to get put together and responded to. It just may not follow the same process. So please, if you have more recommendations, send them. I'm happy to do the addendums and I will ensure that they have the same attention that the standard report is given. But the report's going to go out on these policies this week, and DPD is going to get working, and I'm going to hold them to the same standard. It's to create a standard that we can all work towards, and so it's fair and equitable, and we're all moving in the same direction. Is that everyone good with that?
That makes sense, but also like for people who are really engaging with the policy, because I think outside of just us, I could read a 20-page at home in one night, but the point is a conversation. The intent is to how are we taking this policy language to the community and how, again, what is happening on the ground. And so it's not so much as like, oh, here, I found some edits, but more like how are we engaging our base, the community, and how are we having a conversation around that.
And I think you kind of changed the format of this meeting to involve more of that discussion. So this meeting is basically discussion. So that way it's inclusive of the entire group and they all have the same access to DPD, review the policy. We're kind of all on the same page. So the intention is for this meeting to be more collaborative, and I think we're definitely moving in that direction. So I encourage you guys to come to this meeting with those questions ready to have the discussion. Even if you're not able to read the whole policy, at least view the video, because now we can come in and really engage as a whole group. And the benefit is you have the officers here to ask the questions and have that feedback interaction. And I think so far it's been really productive, based upon from the first meeting when I came in and observed to where we're at now. It's been leaps and bounds, and I think it only can get better the more we're able to kind of find a flow. And I think we're getting there. So the more that we can make this meeting collaborative and discussion-based, the better, and we're getting there.
I agree.
Rosa, are you asking that we maybe put set aside time in the agenda just specifically for the discussion that you're asking for?
Yeah, I think after the first few meetings, we engaged in a conversation that people had a chance to review the policy, things that stood out, or ideas, or questions that came out. that is kind of what we're looking for, because the idea is not like for us to read it on our own and submit some comments, just having that dialogue, so we're bringing perspective from the community that we're hearing. Like, hey, you know, this is, like again, like sometimes people will report this until it keeps on happening, what is going on? So I think that's a dialogue that I'm wanting to see more, and I agree, it's happening a little bit more, but we still haven't found that structure that works.
Should have been maybe in the agenda, just maybe set aside.
Well, I agree. I think what I'll do is I'll work with BPD on structuring this agenda a little bit more specifically, because ideally, so when this stuff is posted on Conveo, the idea is that you basically have a month to do that. So when we're playing the video, we're having the presentation here, the idea is that that is when this discussion should be happening. So that's why there's lead time. Instead of just prior, it would be like, here's the presentation, and you guys really haven't had a chance, you know, here's the policy, here's the presentation, now you guys have to go and read it. Well, now there's lead time. There's almost a whole month lead time before the formal presentation, where you're actually able to view the presentation and read the policy. So ideally, at least have viewed the video, so then when we're coming into this meeting, we're able to have more of that discussion that we're talking about with BPD, because now we can get clarification and answers to questions. So when you guys are going back, whether in a working group or individually, it's a little bit easier to start formulating some recommendations, because you at least skim the policy and have the feedback. So absolutely, I'll work on structuring the agenda so it aligns with that a little bit more. So there's more intention behind that specific discussion that we're having, and this is maybe what you can cut for.
Well, when you do that, can we make sure we're not losing time, staying on the same like over and over, like we put a timeline and I think what you're trying to also say, just plain terms, is we need to come prepared.
Yeah.
We all need to come prepared.
I mean, I think at least having reviewed the video so that you can utilize this time. I think that this time with BPD is really critical, especially having sit in on almost every single working group meeting. A lot of these questions, or at least general attention, things like that, can be kind of flushed out. So then you're actually more focused on doing the recommendations when you're in that meeting. I think it will help those meetings, and probably a lot of people individually be more efficient and effective when you're making their recommendations. So again, these are just growing pains. I don't think anything is necessarily wrong. We're just fine-tuning and figuring out what works with things. And I think there is some value in this lead time instead of just getting a presentation. You guys can really come able to ask questions and dig in while we have the whole team here, and be able to get more out of this meeting, because your time is valuable, right? This is the one time we're all together and young. So I really want this to be valuable time for each of you and to use your resources better. If that makes sense. So yes, I can do that. I will kind of time structure and make the agenda a little bit more intentional, and maybe provide some more, reminder, hey, this is the policy we're doing, a little bit more structure to that to help everybody kind of understand what we're coming in.
For that public reporting of the police officer policy, Senior Officer Bedard is the lead on that team. He's on vacation, so tomorrow what I'm going to post is the policy guide, and his PowerPoint. He gets back in 2 days, and then we'll have him do the recording. It was a bad timing of the lady that does our recording was on vacation, and now Senior Officer Bedard is on vacation. So you'll have everything except for his voiceover, and that'll be posted in a couple of days.
Good, any more questions? Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.